LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 2nd edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 15 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. Plus, I'm going to start off with 4 clips from the White House Correspondents' dinner on Saturday night, all put together with my media criticism and political commentary for a fair use program, fair use media criticism political commentary show for you all today. Messed up my own intro there, but it's because this is something I've actually been doing since way before I started doing these live streams. Since actually the video I made that has the most views, I've gotten about 65 million video views on my videos over the years since I started back in July 2006. And in April 2007, I covered the first White House Correspondents' dinner that I covered with making a video titled David Letterman Makes Fun of Bush in Front of Bush. And that video has gotten, I think, 6.5 million views at this point from April 2007. And it was about a David Letterman top 10 list that got played at the White House Correspondents' dinner in front of George W. Bush, making fun of George W. Bush. And since then, one of the criteria I've used, or the main criterion I've used to judge the comedian at White House Correspondents' dinners is whether they speak truth to power, whether they stand up especially to the president who's there. And I'm going to show, the first clip will be about that, but it actually all ties into the topic of my video. As you can see from the title, the topic of the video is Biden leading victory of liberal democracy over autocracy. And there are like 2 components to this topic about the, and a liberal democracy doesn't mean liberal like in LiberalViewer. Well, LiberalViewer is a double entendre, but a liberal democracy is just a democracy where the rights of the minority are respected. There are like limits on the power of the government, civil liberties, constitutional democracy, or democratic republic, or whatever you want to call it. So that's where the liberal democracy comes from. And if you remember, like the second Monday Media Mix-Up I made last June was about this fight of democracies over autocracies. It was one of Joe Biden's talking points when he was running, and since he's taken office, that there's this struggle between the democracies in the world and the autocracies like China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, and they all are varying amounts of autocracy depending on your point of view there. But the thing that I think is going on here that is really important is, since I did that second Monday Media Mix-Up a year ago, Biden has made a lot of progress, both here at home, in terms of modeling what a liberal democracy is supposed to look like after 4 years of, the fascist wannabe president we had before Joe Biden, who, attacked the First Amendment in the press. And, there hasn't been a White House Correspondents' dinner in 6 years. Since 2016, I wonder why. Or I think the joke that Biden made at the beginning was that we had 4 years of plague and then 2 years of COVID. A 4-year plague and 2 years of COVID, I think. But I'm not going to show any jokes that Biden made. I'm going to first show the part where Trevor Noah spoke truth to power, showing one of these ideals of liberal democracy, and then I'll tie it in with the news clips later about the fight against the Russian autocracy and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and how that's also showing how Biden has done a good job standing up for democracies and helping the overall global fight internationally between democracies and autocracies. But anyway, with that long rambling introduction, I have four political comedy clips, because the White House Correspondents' dinner is just a cornucopia of political comedy. And like I said, I'm going to start off with the clip of Trevor Noah here. These are, now a few of these jokes seem like they're jokes about Biden, especially towards the end, but they're jokes about somebody else, and that's why I cut it off where I do. But there's this one point where I saw Trevor Noah, you'll see a couple jokes in. He makes a joke about Jill Biden, which is a good joke, and I just kept waiting for Joe Biden to say, "You keep my wife's name out of..." No, didn't happen, but you can watch for it anyway, and think about it when you watch the first political comedy clip with me from the White House Correspondents' dinner. Oh, and by the way, you can watch the whole thing at a link I put down under sources, Biden's monologue and Trevor Noah's monologue, and I'm a big fan of Trevor Noah. I'll talk about that more maybe after we watch this first political comedy clip together over here.
Of course, the real reason that it's such an honor to be here tonight is that we all get to be in the same room as the most powerful man in the United States. So let's give it up for Joe Manchin, everybody. Where is he? Is he there? Good to see you, sir. Good to see you. No, for real, Mr. President. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me here. You know, I was a little confused about why me. But then I was told that you get your highest approval ratings when a biracial African guy is standing next to you. So, so let me just say, Joe, I'm glad that I could do my part. And hopefully this will work. I'm not actually him. I just did the voice. More importantly, First Lady Dr. Jill Biden is here, everybody. Give it up for her. You know, interesting fact, even as First Lady, Dr. Biden continued her teaching career. Yeah, the first time a presidential spouse has ever done so. Ever. Congratulations. Now, you might think it's because she loves teaching so much, but it's actually because she's still paying off her student debt. I'm sorry about that, Jill. Yeah, I guess you should have voted for Bernie. You know, so can I just say, I think everyone will agree that it's actually nice to once again have a president who's not afraid to come to the White House Correspondents' dinner and hear jokes about himself. I'll be honest. If you didn't come, I totally would have understood. Yeah, because these people have been so hard on you, which I don't get. I really don't. You know, I think ever since you've come into office, things are really looking up. You know, gas is up, rent is up, food is up, everything. No, it really has been a tough first year for you, Mr. President. And surely you must be a little worried about 2024. You know, there's a lot of passion on the Republican side. There really is. You know, it's going to be an interesting time. And as you all know, President Biden's lack of a filter does get him into hot water sometimes. You know, last month he caused a huge international incident saying that Vladimir Putin should be removed from power. It was very, very upsetting to Russia. Yeah, until someone explained to them that none of the stuff Biden wants actually gets done. But despite some hiccups, President Biden has led the country through some really dark times since he took office. The COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the launch of CNN+. And don't forget, he's also had some major legislative successes. You know, in his first year in office, I might add, you know, he got a bipartisan infrastructure bill passed that would do everything from fixing America's roads and bridges to modernizing school buses, which Matt Gaetz' girlfriend is very excited about. Don't boo love! Not to mention, no president in my memory has given more marginalized groups opportunities. You know, I'm talking about women, the LGBTQ community, the Taliban, the list goes on and on. And I know, Mr. President, that the left is super upset at you, you know? But I think that they should be happy to know that you just recently announced that you're proposing a new 20% minimum tax on the super wealthy. And I will say, President Biden, that you were a big man here, a really big man. You could have targeted Donald Trump, but instead you chose to only raise taxes on billionaires. That was big of you. Really nice. Prove me wrong, show me the taxes. So
yeah, you see that last joke was started being a Biden joke, but it was really a joke on making fun of Donald Trump. And there was like a CNN Plus joke in there and a Matt Gaetz joke in there, you know, sort of with the setup being Joe Biden, but not the punchline. But I had to keep playing at least through there so you get the Taliban joke, because there were actually several good joke, you know, speaking truth to power or like criticizing the president in front of the president, which is what you want to do if you're trying to be a role model for liberal democracy where people's rights are respected. And Joe Biden himself was doing a good job role modeling. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, that's why Donald Trump never showed up for 4 years. Can you imagine Donald Trump sitting there listening to someone make jokes, some of which that kind of land there? You know, the inflation joke. Of course, today I saw on Fox News Channel, Outnumbered, one of their news programs during the day, they were criticizing Biden for laughing about inflation jokes while Americans suffer, because he laughed about that everything's up, inflation, gas, food, everything's up, looking up, that joke. They criticized Biden for laughing at that joke, but I criticized Trump for not showing up and not being a role model of how we have a government where we can criticize our leaders and like nothing bad will happen. And that's what there were a couple other jokes Trevor Noah made at the expense of Joe Biden that are sprinkled into other parts, and then there'll be one at the very end when I show you the final of the 4 clips. But he also, in addition to speaking truth to the main power in the room, the government, the head of the executive branch, who he was standing next to, I guess the media has some power, and the last clip will be kind of about the power that the media has. But he also, Trevor Noah, did not spare members of the media. I'm not even going to show you the jokes he made about Fox News, but one joke he made reminded me of an argument that I seem to have with my viewers a lot about Chuck Todd, and I'll show you that brief Chuck Todd joke and talk about it a little more after we watch it together over here.
A lot of big media names in the room tonight. Chuck Todd is here. Chuck, you here? Yeah? How you doing? I'll ask a follow-up, but I know you don't know what those are. Don't boo him, he's trying. Man, these people are mean, Chuck.
That's what I'm always saying. People are so mean to Chuck just because he's very well prepared, very well informed, but for some reason he just doesn't. This is what I've always said. He doesn't seem to have the ability to listen to what the person's saying and then ask a good cross-examination follow-up question. And as someone who used to be a criminal defense lawyer and cross-examined many witnesses over the years when I feel like I am not just, even though I actually am literally in an armchair here doing armchair criticism of Chuck Todd's cross-examination, it is something that I think I have some basis to do the criticism. And then, I just did a couple weeks ago, I was talking about New York Times propaganda with the subway shooter, even though who they claimed that we got him, but then it turned out the guy turned himself in. And I've done a couple things about propaganda, and I was happy to see that Trevor Noah also took on that topic over in this clip.
I love the New York Times, I really do. You guys are the best. You do some of the most accurate, precise reporting in news. You never fail to write down exactly whatever the police have given you to say. Really powerful. Is it just me, or does the New York Times keep blaming bail reform on crimes that had nothing to do with bail reform? I'm half expecting to open your newspaper and see a headline, Mets blow 4-run lead due to changes in state bail laws.
I think that might have been a shot of the New York Times table there where there was no laughing going on, but because I've been talking about propaganda and even specifically from the New York, it's in the New York Times, I was just saying a couple weeks ago, this is not just something, the Fox News has been doing this whole huge crime wave, Biden responsible for surge in crime, lock yourselves in your houses. The brown people are coming, or whatever it is they're doing over on Fox News. They're actually one of the jokes that Trevor Noah made was that Fox News is like a Waffle House. In the daytime or in the afternoon, it's okay, but once the sun goes down, it's crazy. And then he made some other jokes. Like I said, you can watch the whole routine at the link down in the video description. I was just talking about the show Outnumbered. That's during the daytime, and that's pretty rabid partisanship. And anyway, the last part of Trevor Noah's speech or monologue or routine or whatever you want to call it actually makes the point I was trying to make about the importance of speaking truth to power, the importance of journalism, how this is a sign of liberal democracy and how liberal democracy is going to fight with autocracies. Now, before I show you that clip, I did want to point out that I've already seen a good sort of critique of what you're about to see from Trevor Noah. This is a Slate article. I put a link down in the video description to this article if you want to read it, from Dahlia Lithwick, What Trevor Noah Got Desperately Wrong at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I will not pre-critique the clip before you show it, but I will explain why I like what Trevor Noah is about to say, and but I will also explain Dahlia Lithwick's critique and why I don't think it completely undermines what he's saying after we watch that final White House Correspondents' Dinner clip together over here.
I really hope you all remember what the real purpose of this evening is. Yes, it's fun. Yes, we dress nice. Yes, the people eat, they drink, we have fun. But the reason we're here is to honor and celebrate the Fourth Estate and what you stand for. What you stand for. An additional check and balance that holds power to account and gives voice to those who otherwise wouldn't have one. And like, I'm not just talking about like CNN or Fox or any of the other major organizations. I'm talking about everyone. You know, the young journalists we saw today, you know, intrepid journalists who aren't even in this room in Flint, Michigan, or that daring reporter at the Des Moines Register, or the unflinching local newscaster in El Paso, Texas. Every single one of you, whether you like it or not, is a bastion of democracy. And if you ever begin to doubt your responsibilities, if you ever begin to doubt how meaningful it is, look no further than what's happening in Ukraine. Look at what's happening there. Journalists are risking and even losing their lives to show the world what's really happening. You realize how amazing it is. Like, in America, you have the right to seek the truth and speak the truth, even if it makes people in power uncomfortable, even if it makes your viewers or your readers uncomfortable. You understand how amazing that is? I stood here tonight and I made fun of the President of the United States, and I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine, right? Do you really understand what a blessing it is? Maybe it's happened for so long that it might slip your mind. It's a blessing. In fact, here, ask yourself this question. Honestly, ask yourself this question. If Russian journalists who are losing their livelihoods, as you were talking about, Steve, and their freedom for daring to report on what their own government is doing, if they had the freedom to write any words, to show any stories, or to ask any questions, if they had basically what you have, would they be using it in the same way that you do? Ask yourself that question every day, because you have one of the most important roles in the world. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you. Please be careful leaving tonight. We all know this administration doesn't handle evacuations well. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
One last joke about the evacuation from Afghanistan there. One more speaking truth to power as he's on his way out there. And I thought that was an important reminder of, I mean, you know, I'm not so sure about the event. Some people say it shows that journalists are too cozy with the power brokers in Washington, D.C. They're all sitting down and having dinner together. But, I mean, that's better, I think, than, you know, Donald Trump calling the CNN and all, you know, all the White House correspondents, calling them the enemy of the people, and going after and attacking journalists for asking him questions. You remember, that's what we were living through for 4 years, and that's why the return of this tradition, even though it has its problems, I think is really important. And for some of the reasons there that Trevor Noah was mentioning, the important power of journalism to keep government accountable. And that Dahlia Lithwick criticism I was talking about here was basically that both U.S. democracy and U.S. respect for journalism and the First Amendment and the freedom of the press aren't as great as Trevor Noah made it sound there, that we both have some attacks on our democratic process, all the voter suppression laws out there, the it looks like in some ways for the Trump Republicans, 2020 was a dry run for what they're going to do for 2024, where they're like putting officials in place to get rid of the votes of the people and install the people who install electors, or, the whole thing that didn't work last time. Well, if there's a Republican House and there are Republicans in the state legislatures and judges willing to let the state legislature substitute their judgment for the judgment of the voters, well, the whole thing, our democracy is definitely under threat. And there also journalists are being prosecuted and attacked. And I saw Seal Beater, one of my most loyal viewers these days, I guess, talking about Julian Assange. And I put a link in the live comments there to a video I made many years ago about Julian Assange and how Fox News was trying to say he was guilty of espionage. This was and I was like on Julian Assange's side. So, and the ACLU has always been on Julian Assange's side when it comes to prosecuting him for disseminating information that somebody else stole. The Chelsea Manning stuff that's what got Fox News so upset many years ago, and then the stuff that Russia hacked from the DNC that Julian Assange distributed. And this prosecution of Julian Assange was undertaken not for the Russia collusion stuff, but for the Chelsea Manning stuff was undertaken under the Trump administration, and it was basically for helping Chelsea Manning guess a password for a computer system that she already had access to, but she wanted to have wanted to log in using someone else's account so that there wouldn't be a trail or something. And so helping her guess somebody else's password to a computer she already had access to, that's the crime that supposedly makes Julian Assange guilty of conspiracy, rather than just because journalists, if they receive material that somebody else stole, they're supposed to be able to publish it under the First Amendment. That's why Roger Stone couldn't be prosecuted for his part of the Russia collusion, where he coordinated between the Trump administration and WikiLeaks to put out that stuff that Russia hacked from the DNC. That's why he couldn't be prosecuted in the Mueller report. But anyway, now I'm going off on a huge tangent just because that whole Julian Assange reference in the comments. But I think that Trevor Noah did a really great job. I think that he has a really strong feeling for human rights and civil rights and civil liberties. I read his book, Born a Crime, about how he grew up in South Africa, the son of a white father and a black mother, and so his actual birth was a crime, and how he made it through that system and then made it, I guess, to fame and fortune. But I think kudos to Trevor Noah. I think he did a great job. I really enjoyed the White House Correspondents' Dinner, both the truth to power part, the importance of journalism, the role modeling of what a president should do, unlike, like I said, our wannabe fascist president before Joe Biden. Joe Biden sat there, he smiled, he laughed, he took it with good humor, and that's what you want your government to be like in a liberal democracy. And now to the foreign policy part of liberal democracies fighting autocracies. I'm going to get to the news summaries, and then most of the clips will be on whether Ukraine can win, the increasing U.S. commitment to Ukraine winning in their defense against the invasion by Russia. And then there'll be a couple things about the threat to democracy from the Republican Party at the end, before I get to my bonus dash clip. I guess that's the final clip. But let's get to the news summaries, starting with the longest one. They're going longest to shortest. The longest one this week is ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. George Stephanopoulos one of the biases I talk about all the media has is when they put out a poll that for some reason becomes the top story. So they start with like problems for Biden in the ABC poll, although actually he's doing a little better, honestly. And Democrats have pulled ahead of Republicans in the generic congressional ballot. Well, you'll see it here. But then on to Ian Pannell, who is reporting from, did I write it down where Ian Pannell is I think he's reporting from Kharkiv. Is that right? Which is like a new spot, and yeah, from Kharkiv, which is way up close to the Russian border, and shows just how well the Ukrainians are doing that he can even report from Kharkiv. Or, well, that might be a little bit of an overstatement, but I'll talk about all that a little more after we watch this longest news summary from ABC yesterday together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. We're coming on the air this morning as our brand new poll with the Washington Post shows President Biden and the Democrats closing the gap with Republicans ahead of this year's midterms. But they still face huge challenges. Biden's job approval just 42%, a 5-point improvement since February, and Democrats have pulled even with the GOP in projected midterm ballot. But both numbers still in the historical danger zone for the incumbent party. Inflation, the key driver of discontent. The president is drawing better ratings for handling the war in Ukraine. That's where we begin with the breaking news that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and several other Democrats have just toured Kyiv with President Zelensky, the first official congressional delegation to Ukraine since the Russian invasion. Senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell starts us off. Good morning, Ian.
Yeah, George, good morning from Kharkiv. This is Ukraine's second largest city. The Russian border is only about 15 miles away from here, and Russian troops are even closer because, of course, they've occupied territory around Kharkiv and they've been shelling the city pretty much indiscriminately since day one. Ukraine needs all the help it can get in this war, and this morning America answered that call once again with a bold and really quite brave show of support from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who, as you say, came to Kyiv. This morning, in an unannounced visit, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi led a congressional delegation to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv. In a show of solidarity, Pelosi, the highest-ranking American official to visit Ukraine since the start of the war, affirmed U.S. support for Ukraine.
You're on a frontier of freedom, and that your fight is a fight for everyone. And so our commitment is to be there for you until the fight is done.
Russia's all-out assault on eastern Ukraine intensified this week, but there are growing signs its campaign may not be going to plans. This was also the week the war returned to the capital, Kyiv. Russian missiles striking the heart of the city. There haven't been scenes like this in Kyiv for weeks. Fires raging as rescuers rush in to help the wounded. Kyiv had been relatively quiet, calm enough for UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres to visit the outskirts of the city to see the atrocities of war firsthand.
There is no way a war can be acceptable in the 21st century. Look at that.
But just hours after Guterres walked the streets, Russia fired multiple rockets into civilian areas. In the southern port city of Mariupol, civilians hiding out in the Azovstal steel plant are still under siege. This video from the far-right Azov battalion appearing to show the chaos after Russians attacked a hospital inside the plant. Citizens trapped amid intensive fighting. We saw demining teams collecting unexploded ordnance in liberated villages near Kyiv. More than 80,000 explosive devices have been found across Ukraine since the war began. You can see here there are grenades, there are shells. These are anti-tank mines. These guys are working around the clock now to try and find them, collect them and detonate them and allow the people to come back into their homes. The trucks take the munitions deep into the woods, and then this.
2, 1, вибух.
The West's military support for Ukraine has been a leveller. The Pentagon shipping more than half the howitzer long-range artillery guns pledged to Ukraine. President Biden then asking Congress for an additional $33 billion over the next 5 months.
The cost of this fight is not cheap, but caving to aggression is going to be more costly if we allow it to happen.
While Putin ramped up his rhetoric, warning of lightning-fast strikes, potentially against arms shipments, and making a thinly veiled reference to Russia's arsenal of nuclear weapons. saying we have all the tools for this, things no one else can boast of having. This week, the Kremlin abruptly cut off natural gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria, a move European leaders and President Biden call blackmail. Tensions now so high between the Cold War adversaries that it made a secret prisoner swap between the US and Russia all the more extraordinary. Former US Marine Trevor Reed, held captive in Russia for nearly 3 years, walking to his freedom on a tarmac in Turkey. But the swap doesn't seem to be the start of a thaw in relations. Russia showing no signs of easing their aggression, but a US defense official saying their eastern assault is days behind schedule. But Ukraine may be going on the offensive. A series of mysterious explosions inside Russia in 3 cities near the border. There was no claim of responsibility, but an advisor to President Zelensky saying simply, karma is a cruel thing.
Well, George, I think this war has clearly entered a different phase now. This looks set to be a long, drawn-out battle. Progress for Russia here in the east is slow. It's described by the Pentagon as plodding, and there seems to be no realistic hope of any kind of breakthrough in peace talks, perhaps because, above all, both sides sincerely believe that they can win this war, and neither side is ready to make any kind of concessions. George?
Ian Pannell, thanks. We're joined now by the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova. Ambassador, thank you.
And I don't have a clip of the Ukrainian ambassador, but you can watch all of ABC's This Week at a link I put under sources in the video description. I thought that was a really good news summary, a good report from Ian Pannell. One thing I noticed, how many times have we watched news clips in the last, we're starting the 3rd month of this war now or whatever? How many times since the siege of Mariupol have we seen a report? How many times have you heard anyone call the battalion there the far-right Azov battalion? That is a fact that you don't hear reported very often, although that's one of the things that if you study more closely, that there are like these right-wing militias in Ukraine, and one of them is trapped in that steel mill in Mariupol, the Azov battalion. And, that's sort of the basis for the whole Putin propaganda that they're denazifying Ukraine. But I don't know. Here in the United States, we also have right-wing militias. And, of course, it's a little bit different there because we're talking about an armed battalion there. But the situation in Ukraine, especially with the ongoing war with the Donbass going all the way back like 8 years to 2014. So it's not like Ukraine's been at peace. So, a militia in Ukraine isn't quite the same thing as a militia in the United States, but we've got our right-wing militias here in the United States. It doesn't mean, that the United States is a Nazi country. And then there was this weird thing where that Russian ambassador Lavrov was saying that, well, Hitler had Jewish roots, so it makes sense that Zelensky would be the leader of a Nazi country or something. And then, like, Israel, who's been kind of neutral in this whole thing, had a huge reaction to that. But anyway, I'm going off on a whole tangent about the right-wing, semi-fascist militias in Ukraine, and you don't normally see reports in the cable news media about them, but there you heard Ian Pannell at least mention it was like buried in there, but he did say that. And then these mysterious explosions that are happening with the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, was calling karma. It reminded me of something I wanted to say about how the title of this video, how Biden is leading this victory of democracies over autocracies. That, I don't know whether Biden's initial response to the threats, there were some good things that Biden did. Releasing all that intelligence to sort of circumvent the ability of Russia to create their false flag operations or to pretend they weren't doing what they were doing. That actually helped a lot. But I think once the one thing that the United States government did that was not good, it's kind of the opposite of what happened with the Taliban in Afghanistan, is that they thought the Ukrainian government was going to fall in the first couple days. You heard that, and pretty much everybody did. But I guess you just don't know how bad the Russian army is until it tries to fight, is what happened. And I think that the Biden administration has done a good job of pivoting when Ukraine didn't fall, and really gathering together the NATO allies and putting together these huge packages of arms and aid, especially this last one that you'll hear more and more about from the newsmaker clips. So, as for those mysterious explosions, I also think that there's probably a lot of stuff that the United States is doing to help the Ukrainians that we don't know about right now, that will be found out in the history books, where I think history's going to make Biden's leadership and the leadership of the Biden administration in this crisis look even better. I mean, assuming it doesn't turn out that there's like a nuclear bomb used, which I'll talk about when I get to some of the newsmaker clips, I think the second Robert Menendez clip. I'll talk a little bit about how Ukrainian victory makes Russian use of a nuclear device more likely. But before I get to that dark area, I want to move on to the next news summary. This is NBC News' Meet the Press, and I think this news summary fits the way I've characterized. If you look at the descriptions, I put like brief summaries of all of the clips I'm using down in the video description. They're numbered 1 through 15, and this one, I think, I reuse this description over and over again, but this is really the one that you have Chuck Todd and Erin McLaughlin on the surprise visit of Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi to Kyiv as part of increasing U.S. commitment to victory for Ukraine's defense of Russian invasion. That's basically what the main news was that you'll see covered by all the news organizations, by which I mean the 4 that aren't Fox News. And I will talk about that with you a little more after we watch the NBC News Meet the Press news summary together with Chuck Todd. No follow-up questions required over in this clip.
Well, a good Sunday morning. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made an unannounced visit to Kyiv with a congressional delegation. She's now the highest-ranking American official to make it to the capital of Ukraine since this war started. And it's also the latest evidence that America's commitment to Ukraine is only growing, amid signs that the war may end up expanding and that Russia's assault in Ukraine's east may be stalling. So let's take all of these in order. First, President Biden is now asking Congress for $33 billion in aid to Ukraine, most of it military assistance. In total, it would bring the amount of aid requested to close to $50 billion. That's more than we spent each of the last 5 years in Afghanistan, or at least we're on a pace to do that. Mr. Biden's request came only days after Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said the U.S. wants to degrade Russia's ability to make war on other countries. Next, the expanding war. This past week saw explosions in a breakaway region of Moldova, likely caused by Russia, and fires and explosions at several war-related sites inside Russia's borders, many in range of Ukrainian missiles. The European Union appears ready to impose a potentially crippling embargo on Russian oil after Russia cut off gas exports to Bulgaria and Poland, with an eye towards doing the same to Germany. Finally, Russia's advance on Ukraine's east has run into stiffer than expected resistance again, and Ukrainian officials say the Russians are having to redeploy troops from the country's far east as reinforcements. So we're going to begin our coverage with NBC News correspondent Erin McLaughlin, who is in Kyiv. And Erin, with the Speaker of the House, congressional delegation visiting yesterday, I assume Ukraine's leadership has to feel that at least symbolically the U.S. is with them, joined at the hip.
Oh, absolutely, Chuck. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi arriving here in Kyiv this weekend. She says to thank Ukraine for its fight for freedom, telling President Zelensky, quote, "Our commitment is to be there for you until the fight is done." Her visit comes just days after 2 Russian missiles struck the heart of the capital as the UN Secretary General was visiting. This is the aftermath of those missile strikes. One of the missiles struck that factory just over that way, believed to be be the intended target. The other missile struck that apartment building, killing 1 and injuring 10. The mayor of Kyiv saying that those strikes effectively amount to the middle finger from Russia to the West as well as to the United Nations. It's also seen as a warning to anyone wanting to visit the capital, wanting to meet with President Zelensky, which is perhaps why Speaker Pelosi's visit was shrouded in secrecy. It happened yesterday evening, was only made public today. Pelosi has been pushing for Congress to pass the $33 billion aid package at the request of President Biden. Badly needed funds for this war as it's raging across the South and the East. The British Ministry of Defense saying that Russia has made some gains, although those gains have come at a high price due to fierce Ukrainian resistance. I've been speaking to a Ukrainian military official who says they are seeing signs that Russia is amassing more forces to strengthen its assault on the Donbass region. Meanwhile, all eyes on the southern besieged port city of Mariupol. Yesterday, a rare glimmer of good news. Some 20 civilians were evacuated from that steel plant surrounded by Russian forces. That humanitarian corridor secured by the United Nations and the Red Cross. President Zelensky expressing hope that there will be more evacuations of civilians today, Chuck.
Erin McLaughlin, excellent reporting from Kyiv, and I'm really glad you made note of the fact those missile strikes came when the head of the United Nations was visiting on a supposed peacekeeping mission. Erin, thank you. And joining me now is the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. It's Robert Menendez of New Jersey, a Democrat. Senator Menendez.
And I will have a couple clips of Senator Menendez coming up, clips 11 and 12, one from the Chuck Todd interview. But I thought, like I said, that was a good news report. I saw that news report over and over again because I also watched the Sunday show with Jonathan Capehart, and Erin McLaughlin was on like at the beginning and then like an hour into the 2-hour show. And I mean, it was good coverage. NBC News. I don't know, it wasn't as good as what you got from Ian Pannell, I don't think. And one of the other things is for some reason Chuck Todd really emphasized that the missiles coming into Kyiv, right, in conjunction with the visit of the head of the UN, though in the Ian Pannell piece they actually said it was after his visit. And so but I don't even know which is true, but I saw that there was a little bit of a conflict. And one thing I forgot to mention about the Ian Pannell report on ABC, I thought the question he ended with, or the comment he made at the end, is that since both sides, both Ukraine and Russia, think they're winning, that means the war could probably go on for a long time because no one's going to like negotiate a peace when they think they could still win without a negotiation. And that's kind of the situation we're in, where it looks like Russia did really badly in the first phase, trying to topple the government and take over Kyiv and basically take over the whole country. And now they're trying to regroup, as I've talked about for weeks, and take over just like the eastern Donbass region, and then through the south, through the Mariupol, through to Odessa, and then possibly even to Moldova, and that would cut off the southern part of Ukraine so that there's no access to the Black Sea, which that is unacceptable according to both a Republican and a Democrat I'm going to show coming up. But I want to get to the next news summary. Before I do want to thank my live viewers for your participation in the program. I was actually a little worried when I first started there. I had a very low number of live viewers, but I'm happy to see a lot of the regulars showed up. And I also want to thank the Super Chat contributors. That made me feel a lot better that people were not only showing up, but putting out their hard-earned money to show that they support what I'm doing here. So thank you, Matthew, Tom Trask, and Lulu Girl. That makes me feel a lot better about the time and effort I put into putting together this program for you. I think it took me like 8 or 10 hours, and I've got you your 15 clips with all of my commentary. Now we're almost halfway through the news summaries. The next news summary is the one from CBS News Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan and Charlie D'Agata. And this is very close to the NBC News Meet the Press one, where, the surprise visit of Nancy Pelosi, and the increasing U.S. commitment. They both talked about $33 billion packages, but I think it's more like a $50 billion package that Chuck Todd will even detail and when I show his questioning of Robert Menendez in a little bit. But first, here's Margaret Brennan and Charlie D'Agata giving the CBS News Face the Nation news summary from yesterday. Over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We awoke this morning to a stunning sight. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi being greeted by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in the streets of Kyiv. She and 6 other Democrats made a surprise visit to the region to show support and discuss the president's proposed additional $33 billion U.S. aid package to Ukraine.
We are here to say to you that we are with you till this fight is over.
We'll win, and we'll win together.
And we begin today with CBS News foreign correspondent Charlie D'Agata, who has the latest from eastern Ukraine.
Good morning, Margaret. This is what's left of an industrial site destroyed by the Russians after learning it was being used as a base by Ukrainian forces. It's just an example of the onslaught facing Ukrainians along the front line. From beneath the smoldering ruins of the steel plant in Mariupol, a hint of hope. Ukrainian fighters said around 20 women and children made it out of the hundreds of civilians who've been trapped for months. Along the front lines in the east, the fight for the Donbass region has become a battle of artillery and attrition. Russian forces have greater numbers and a longer reach. Places like Popasna have been flattened. The town of Lyman is expected to be among the next to fall. Volunteers shuttled a few remaining residents in a minibus. Galina described the shelling as constant day and night. Her 87-year-old mother, Lydia, escaped with little more than her wheelchair and her cat, Dasha. Right after we left town, a Russian airstrike destroyed that railway bridge leading out of town. It's part of a wider campaign for Russians trying to stop U.S. and Western weapons from reaching Ukrainian forces fighting on these front lines. And everywhere we've gone, we've found freshly dug defensive positions, fallbacks for retreating Ukrainian forces. It's where we found volunteer Joshua Cropper, an Iraq War Marine veteran from Wasilla, Alaska.
It's nothing that I've experienced before. It's a different type of war.
What is it like fighting beside these Ukrainian forces?
I wish that they had a more NATO experience, more NATO training, but
more NATO weapons.
More NATO weapons, but their heart's in the right place and their conviction's in the right place.
Heart and conviction only go so far. The battalion commanders said they've yet to receive any of America's promised heavy weapons, showing us a U.S.-supplied Browning .50 caliber machine gun that jams every 2 rounds. Just up the road from us, battle-weary soldiers take a break after nearly 2 months of heavy fighting. The Ukrainian government said the Russians have suffered heavy losses for modest gains. Yet the intensity of the fight has only worsened by the day. The next few days here will be critical. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry said there's evidence that the Russian military is building up troops and weaponry in order to step up the assault on this region. Margaret?
Charlie D'Agata, thank you. And we have received word this morning from the International Committee of the Red Cross that those evacuations are indeed taking place in Mariupol, and we hope they can continue safely. We turn now to national security correspondent David Martin. David, always great to have you here.
So then they have an analyst on. You know, I've been talking about how the different corporate news media have been changing their opening format since the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where they'd have multiple reporters, or in this case, you see they have a reporter and then they go to a military analyst who does like the big board. And well, I don't think he really did that this week, but if you want to see the David Martin's analysis as like the military strategy of what's going on, down under sources is the CBS News Face the Nation link that actually goes to their YouTube channel, where the whole thing is like cut up into segments, including that one, where you can watch that whole thing if you really want to. I thought that was pretty good report. They mentioned Mariupol without talking about the right-wing battalion there. I saw that they did that report. Part of the report, they talked to some American guy, some American Marine fighting there from Wasilla, of all places. My immediate reaction when I saw that was, well, of course he's fighting there, because in Wasilla you can see Russia from your house, right? Or that's a old Sarah Palin joke. Sarah Palin never actually said that. That was like what Tina Fey said, because I think Sarah Palin just said you can see Alaska from Russia. But anyway, I mean, no, you can see Russia from Alaska, excuse me. I also thought there was some good reporting about that, like, bad machine gun that jammed every 2 rounds and how they're still waiting for American arms. That's kind of different from most of the other reports that are, like, really raw U.S. logistics is, like, one of the things that's responsible for this great Ukrainian surge and, the failure of the Russian invasion. Most of the corporate media gives a lot of the credit to U.S. arms being put in there, and so that's some criticism. I don't see a lot of the arms that the United States is giving to the Ukrainian resistance, but there was also kind of ominous about. I mean, there was some stuff in there about Russia having problems with their advances, but also there's this huge Russian buildup, and for the last few weeks I've talked about this May 9th date, and they talked about this in a lot of the news programs and clips I didn't take with the newsmakers, that May 9th was supposedly going to be when Russia was going to try to declare victory in Ukraine, and that doesn't seem possible now, because May 9th is the victory over Nazi Day from World War II in Russia, and so now there are people predicting that on May 9th Vladimir Putin might go from a special military operation to actually declaring war on Ukraine, or maybe even a wider war involving NATO, and like really pinning NATO for the fact, pinning responsibility on NATO for the fact that Russia is doing so badly in their invasion of Ukraine. But anyway, I wanted to point that out before I get to... Now, this next news summary is not from a news program. If you have watched my program for a long time, my live streams and my Fox News bias videos, you know that Fox News isn't really a news organization. Sometimes journalism happens there, but if you read The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman, you know that Roger Ailes created Fox News as a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, which is why I think even on one of their straightest of straight news programs, you see, and Brett Baer is hosting Fox News Sunday this week. He's one of their supposedly straight news journalists, but they don't start with their reporter in Kyiv or Lviv. They actually do have Greg Palkot later in the program, I think reporting from Lviv, if I remember, and they do have a Ukraine report. And Greg Palkot, actually, the very first LiberalViewer I ever made was Fox News Tries to Make the News in Lebanon, back in July 2006. My very first LiberalViewer video was a criticism of Greg Palkot. So I wish they put Greg Palkot first, like all the other news organizations, but they didn't. He's like 30 minutes into the program. They started with Alexandra Hoff in Washington, D.C., because this is all about politics. Ukraine is in there, but the main story, as usual, is like problems for the Biden administration. And they're the only one who actually show clips in the news summary from the White House Correspondents' dinner, and they talk about inflation, economy. Ukraine's in there, but of course immigration and COVID, and they just can't give up the precious first 10 minutes that most people are going to watch, or more people are going to watch of any news program. The first 10 minutes of Fox News Sunday. Well, I don't know. Depends on who the newsmaker interview is, but anyway, they're not going to like waste it on what's going on in Ukraine when they can get in those Republican talking points about problems for the Biden administration, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch the Fox News summary together over here.
Hello again from Fox News in Washington. It is a week of contrasting images. Stars joined Washington's elite at a high-profile dinner to honor the Beltway Press Corps. But across the U.S., rising prices and concerns about the U.S. economy dominated dinner table discussions. In Ukraine, there are new signs that Russia is in for the long haul. And at the southern border, a growing crisis has local officials strained and members of Congress in an uproar. In a moment, we'll talk to the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. But we begin with Team Fox coverage. Brian Yennis at the southern border. First to Alex Hoff here in Washington. Alex?
Well, Brett, COVID-19 still a direct concern in the West Wing. On Friday, White House Communications Director Kate Bedingfield said she tested positive. She was in a meeting with the president earlier in the week, and days prior to that, the vice president revealed that she was also positive and remains in quarantine. The White House Correspondents' dinner returned for the first time in 3 years with the same style and satire.
Why in hell are we still doing this?
Dr. Fauci dropped out. That should have been a pretty big sign.
Plus, a new requirement that every single guest be vaccinated and test negative.
We're here to show the country that we're getting through this pandemic.
President Biden skipped the meal portion of the event out of COVID-19 concerns. It capped off a week where cabinet members played defense on the Hill. Attorney General Merrick Garland was pressed about crime rates, and Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm pressed about rising gas prices.
I mean, it is a huge burden. The president's obsessed with this as well.
And things got heated when Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was asked about the administration's plan to lift the pandemic-era policy Title 42 at the border. This as a federal judge temporarily blocked the administration from taking steps to wind it down.
Look, I get it. You want comprehensive immigration reform and a big amnesty thing. Very unlikely that's going to happen. So we have to operate under the laws that exist now.
The White House also on defense over a surprise decline in the first quarter GDP.
Some are predicting there may be a recession in 2023. I'm concerned about it.
The White House says recent reports don't paint the full picture and touted job creation and low unemployment rates. Now, in the past several days, the president has signaled that he may be getting closer to forgiving at least some student debt. Loan payments have already been paused through August 31st. And according to the White House, executive action is on the table to extend that pause even further. Brett.
Alex Hoff reporting from here in Washington. Alex, thank you. Now let's turn to Brian Yennis, live near the southern border along the Rio Grande Valley. Brian?
So, yeah, Ukraine wasn't even the second reporter. The second reporter was the immigration crisis. And I've talked about that enough, and I don't even want to go into that. But is there an immigration crisis in the countries bordering Ukraine? Or is it a refugee crisis? Is it a human crisis? Need to provide assistance and asylum. In fact, people have a legal right to request asylum from the United States. That doesn't make them illegal immigrants. It doesn't make them. That's actually lawful. It doesn't make them. So, anyway, but like, see, I said I wasn't going to talk about it, and I just. If you want to talk about a real immigration crisis, what about, wrong way. This book right here, Separated by Jacob Soboroff, about how the Trump administration took thousands of children away from their parents and forgot to plan any way to ever get them back to their parents, and it was I mean, talk about an immigration crisis. And Fox News did not cover it as much as, every single day, there's every hour of every day, pretty much, on Fox News. They're back to the border with this crisis, which, like I said, it's about problems that people are fleeing in the Northern Triangle countries, Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Colombia. Sorry, Nicaragua is not one of them. It's Colombia, El Salvador, and Guatemala. Do I have that right? Maybe someone in the live comments can correct me. What are the three countries of the not the Golden Triangle, of the Northern Triangle countries? It's Honduras and Guatemala. We both know Honduras and Guatemala. Is Colombia the third one? Or is it Nicaragua? or am I totally off? So anyway, but that's the real crisis, is what's going on down there in the Northern Triangle, and we're just seeing the refugees that are resulting from that, and that's anyway. Didn't I say I wasn't going to talk about that? So I got to really quickly go through these last two news summaries because they're both under 2 minutes. Oh no, this is just one more news summary. Excuse me. CNN State of the Union news summary, where they actually talk about the immigration crisis a little bit at the end of their original news summary, and they have sort of a clip from the White House Correspondents' dinner. So in this way, CNN is almost mirroring what you saw on Fox News, but the White House Correspondents' dinner, they don't actually play a clip. And the immigration story is there at the end because it's a transition. This is a bias I've talked about from all the news media. When they have a big guest, they bias their news summary in favor of making their guest seem like the most important thing in the news. And it's Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And I have a couple clips of him, one talking about this disinformation governance board that's gotten people on Fox News so upset, and the nominee they don't like, what's her name, Jankowicz or something. I'll get to that later. So I do have an Alejandro Mayorkas clip coming up on that. But first, here's the CNN news summary that, like I said, it's eerily similar to the Fox News one for other reasons, I think, over here.
In Washington, where the State of our Union is showing solidarity with Ukraine. And we have breaking news. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced this morning a surprise visit to meet with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in Kyiv, making her the highest-ranking U.S. official to visit Ukraine since Russia invaded. She spoke at a news conference this morning from Poland.
Do not be bullied by bullies. If they're making threats, you cannot back down. That's my view of it, that we're there for the fight, and you cannot fold to a bully.
Speaker Pelosi's visit comes as Congress is now considering whether to approve President Biden's request for $33 billion of additional aid for Ukraine. But while the White House works to get that passed, the president is also focusing his attention on challenges at home as his party gears up for the midterm elections. At the White House Correspondents' dinner last night, he joked about facing bipartisan opposition to some of his policies. One of the major issues dividing his own party right now concerns over a move from the administration to lift Title 42, a Trump-era pandemic rule that makes it easier to turn away migrants at the border. A federal judge is keeping that rule in place for now, but President Biden faced bipartisan pushback over his plans to end the policy because of an expected massive influx of migrants at the border. Joining me now, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much.
So yeah, I will have an Alejandro Mayorkas clip, but from Fox News Sunday, not from CNN State of the Union. By the way, thank you, live viewers, for pointing out the third country is El Salvador. I don't know, did I pull a Rick Perry? Remember when Texas Governor Rick Perry was running for president? He would wanted to cut 3 federal agencies, and he couldn't remember the third one. It was I can't even remember the first 2. I remember the third one was Department of Energy, because, speaking of karma, after he couldn't remember the Department of Energy in that debate, he ended up being the Secretary of the Department of Energy. But when I went Honduras, Guatemala, and I forgot, does that count as a Rick Perry? I don't know. But anyway, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, those are the countries where the Northern Triangle countries where a lot of our refugees are coming from. And anyway, that's a refugee problem, not an immigration problem. That was the point I was trying to make before that clip. I also pretty much pre-criticized that clip or explained why I think it emphasized immigration and Title 42 at the end of the news summary because they were going to Alejandro Mayorkas, the DHS secretary. But and I will have a clip of him coming up, but now I want to do what I promised earlier. 2 Republicans who are pretty much saying the same thing as to what they think victory for Ukraine, defending themselves against this Russian invasion, would look like. Also about this $50 billion package that Biden has proposed. To some of it's military aid, some of it's governmental aid, and some of it is humanitarian aid. I'll show you first Representative Michael McCaul, a Republican, talking to George Stephanopoulos on ABC, and then then Democrat Robert Menendez talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press. And their definitions of victory for Ukraine are actually very similar, so pay attention to that part of their answer, starting with Michael McCaul over here.
I want to pick up on the Speaker's visit to Ukraine this morning with a congressional delegation expressing support for that aid package. I know you've expressed your own support for it as well. Do you expect this to pass relatively quickly through the Congress?
Yes, I do. I think time is of the essence. The next 2 to 3 weeks are going to be very pivotal and very decisive in this war. And I don't think we have a lot of time to waste in Congress. I wish we'd had this a little bit sooner, but we have it now. If I were Speaker for a day, I'd call Congress back into session, back into work, as we won't be in session next week. But every day we don't send them more weapons is a day where more people will be killed and a day where they could lose this war. I think they can win it, but we have to give them the tools to do it.
I was just going to ask you that question. Do you think they can win the war? And I guess I'll follow up by asking, what does winning mean?
Well, the narrative initially, George, was it'd be over in 4 days, and they'd have a puppet government in Kyiv. Putin went for everything, and he miscalculated. And we saw the Ukrainians win there. And then it was, well, we can help them defend themselves. And now the narrative is everyone I talk to, and I've been to the region twice, they can actually win this war. And I think that should be the goal. And I was pleased to hear Secretary Austin and Blinken echo that thought, that they can actually win. I think a win would be to go on the offensive in Donbass with this artillery we're giving them, the howitzers, and these lethal drones, and push them out. They're trying to also bomb Odessa. This is an attempt to seal off the Black Sea, all the way from, the Donbass, Mariupol, Crimea into Odessa, and then cut off the Black Sea and choke Ukraine. We have to stop that. The UK has done a great job with anti-ship weapons in Odessa, and they actually downed a Russian warship with their own Neptune, which is really phenomenal. And it's been very inspirational. I do think the fighting spirit and morale of the Ukrainians is far superior to the morale of the Russian soldier right now.
But how about the concerns that these attacks on Russia could actually lead to a war?
So yeah, there's Mike McCaul giving a Republican ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I think. I'm not sure. But Robert Menendez is the Democrat in charge of the Senate Foreign Affairs Committee. And he says kind of the same thing, especially about the South. I don't know about pushing Russia out of the Donbass, where they've been since, and Crimea. So I don't think Russia can be pushed out of Crimea that they've been in since 2014, or even some of the areas of Donbass. But that part about not letting Russia cut off the southern part of Ukraine and the access to the Black Sea, Odessa, near where Mariupol is, that whole area there, that it seems to be like an important victory, part of the victory definition, and you'll hear it from Robert Menendez talking to Chuck Todd. And I think Chuck Todd, like I said, well prepared, or at least his producers have prepared him well, and they really detail that $50 billion package that Mike McCaul, the Republican, said could probably pass the Congress quickly. And here's Robert Menendez, a Democrat, also backing that up in this clip.
$50 billion, Senator Menendez, is what essentially the president's asked for in total allocation. You put the two numbers together, nearly $50 billion. This appears to be the most money we've ever spent on a war that we've not fired a shot in, the United States. Is there a limit in how much support we're going to give Ukraine for this? Or as long as we think they can win this war, we'll do what it takes?
I think we will do what it takes to see Ukraine win, because it's not just about Ukraine, it is about the international order. If Ukraine does not win, if Putin can ultimately not only succeed in the Donbass, but then be emboldened maybe to go further. If he strikes a country under NATO, under our treaty obligations with NATO, then we would be directly engaged. And so stopping Russia from getting to that point is critically of interest to us as well as the world, so that we don't have to send our sons and daughters into battle. And I think that that ability not to have to send our sons and daughters into battle is priceless.
I know many officials answer the following questions by saying it's up to Ukraine or what they decide is victory here. But what do you believe is Ukrainian victory? What does Ukrainian victory look like to you, sir?
Well, the reason many officials answer that way to you, Chuck, is because it's Ukraine that must determine what it will or will not accept to end this war. After such horrific human rights violations, war crimes that Putin has committed against the Ukrainian people, it's hard to understand what President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people will accept. Maybe there will be some territorial concession, maybe. But it cannot be in a way that ultimately blocks Ukraine from seaports and having access to the sea, which is going to be vital for commerce as well as national security. But it's the horrific acts that Putin has committed, the war crimes that he has committed, that gives Ukraine very little room to think about what is peace here.
Quick question about immigration. I'm going to have Secretary Mayorkas on.
So, yeah, like I said, I think there's a lot of matchup between Robert Menendez and Michael McCaul, the House Republican, Michael McCaul, and the Senate Democrat, in terms of what the definition of victory is, especially in the southern part, as I was saying. One thing about victory, I was talking about this book from my military strategy, or my grand strategy class back when I was a history major as an undergraduate. One of the books we read was this Edward Lutwak book, Strategy, The Logic of War and Peace. And I'm not a big fan of necessarily the policy positions of Edward Lutwak, but one of the things I learned in that book that was really interesting is how the logics can sometimes be backwards in War and Peace. I've been talking about this for the last few weeks, and one thing about victory and the increasing chances of Ukrainian victory in this conflict is that the greater the chances of that victory, and the greater Putin's humiliation from his loss, it seems like that would be great for the triumph of liberal democracy over autocracy. But there's also a threat involved there. The greater the victory, the greater the chance of like a catastrophic decision on the part of the Russians to use nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons. And that's a point that Robert Menendez made in this brief clip from Fox News Sunday I wanted to show you over here.
Side for themselves.
How much do you fear that Russia does use some sort of nuclear weapon, tactical or otherwise?
Well, one of my concerns is that, ironically, the more success that the Ukrainians have, the greater the risk that Putin will do something because he's losing and has to save face at home. And so the potential of a chemical, biological, or tactical nuclear weapon may grow as a result of that. And that is a real concern. Understand that Putin did this in Syria. Unfortunately, the world didn't care about Syria. But he used chemical weapons in Syria. He used indiscriminate bombing of civilian sites, hospitals, schools, and more. And yet, the world didn't care at that moment. So he is capable of doing that. And of course, there are chemical weapon conventions with consequences for the use of chemical weapons if he were to do that.
The president's asked for $33 billion.
So someone, Matthew, I think in the comments said I have a book that I read in 1983, but I don't think I took that course till like 87 or 88, because although I think I might have stolen this book. I was just looking. It says, property of Ezra Stiles Library, do not remove. Ezra Stiles is one of the residential colleges. That was my residential college at Yale. Apparently, I stole this book. I didn't remember stealing this book, but apparently I don't know, maybe there's some other explanation that I came honestly by this book, but otherwise I guess I gotta send it back to New Haven. Anyway, that was not a very happy subject from Robert Menendez. He was talking about how the greater, this illogic of war and peace, really, that as your probability and your factual success grows, that can actually increase the chances of something really bad happening, like the use of a nuclear weapon. So those were the end of the clips on Ukraine. I do have a couple more clips on the, sort of the Republican thing. Well, this first clip is what I've been hearing about over and over again. I don't know much about it. There's a disinformation governance board that they are putting together at the Department of Homeland Security. It seems more like something that's focused at overseas disinformation, and there's like this freak out from Republicans in the right where they called it like the Ministry of Truth in 1984. And anyway, I'm going to show you this clip of the Secretary of Homeland Security answering questions from Bret Baier over on Fox News. So this is the best Fox News can come up with to... they're just not happy about this new agency or board, I guess this new board in the Department of Homeland Security, and especially this woman who's been appointed, this angry woman, I guess, angry liberal woman or whatever. They don't like being appointed to head it over in this clip.
Of misinformation. This week we learned the DHS's Disinformation Governance Board was coming out, and we saw media concerns about free speech. You understand some of this pushback?
Oh, there's no question, Brett, that we could have done a better job in communicating what it does. And let me share with you what this Department of Homeland Security does and has been doing for years, throughout the past administration included. We address disinformation that presents a security threat to the homeland. Disinformation from Russia, from China, from Iran, from the cartels. I'll give you a real-life example. The cartels spread disinformation that Title 42 does not apply to the Haitians. Mm-hmm. And that prompts potentially Haitians to come to the United States. And what do? U.S. Customs and Border Protection, phenomenal enforcement agency, goes on Creole language stations and communicates that Title 42 does apply
so it
to
sounds
Haitians.
A little bit like the Global Engagement Center at the State Department. It's a little redundant.
This is a working, Brett, I really need to clarify. This is a working group that takes best practices to make sure that in addressing disinformation that presents a threat to the homeland, our work does not infringe on free speech, does not infringe on civil rights, civil liberties. It's not about speech. It's about the connectivity to violence. That is what we need to address. You know, an individual has the free speech right to spew anti-Semitic rhetoric. What they don't have the right to do is take hostages in a synagogue.
Yes.
And that's where we get involved.
So the president's pick to lead this is Nina Jankowicz, which she's taking heat for tweets and comments about major news stories, the Hunter Biden laptop, others. The laptop story obviously was blocked from social media outlets because it was called Russian propaganda until it wasn't. So do you really think that Jankowicz is anywhere near objective enough for this particular job?
Yes, I do. And by the way, highly regarded as a subject matter expert, and I don't question her objectivity. There are people in the department who have a diverse range of views, and they're incredibly dedicated to mission. We're not the opinion police. She has testified before Congress a number of times. She's recognized as a tremendous authority, and we're very fortunate to have her.
Was the Steele dossier disinformation?
It's not for me to opine on
You
that.
know, Americans
Brett.
are generally wary of anything that
of
suggests censorship.
And that's exactly why we set up this working group, to make sure that our work to address a real threat to the homeland, the threat posed by Russian disinformation, the threat posed by Chinese disinformation, by Iranian disinformation, the work that we do does not infringe on people's right of free speech. That's why this working group was set up. And we'll do a better job of communicating about that. And I'm looking forward to testifying before the United States Senate on Wednesday.
Are you really?
I am, because I'm going to.
It's been a rough week, I know. And we appreciate you coming in and answering questions.
Brett,
we really do.
You know, if there's.
So, yeah, that sounded sort of like a tempest in a teapot there, and he's going to be testifying on Wednesday, and I'm sure there'll be some Republicans who attempt to make something out of this, which sounds like, I said, at least I haven't really researched it very thoroughly, but it sounds like even Bret Baier was saying it's duplicative of something that the State Department already does in terms of foreign disinformation, and it's not really focused on the things that the Hunter Biden laptop or any of that stuff, but or people in the United States who spread those types of stories. But one thing I found so disingenuous is like Bret Baier, we're here in Americans, at Fox News or whatever, we're always very concerned anything that seems like censorship. But what about like the weeks that Fox News and the Republican Party spent attacking the Disney Corporation for expressing political views, and then the Republicans in Florida actually punished Disney for expressing certain political views? I mean, that is like the government punishing speech. That's like a huge, and I'll have a brief example of a Republican saying that the like very slim part of the Republican Party that hasn't gone totally crazy in the post-Trump or in the Trump and post-Trump era. And actually my next clip is another one of those few Republicans who fits in that category, Adam Kinzinger, who has come out strongly against Trumpism in the Republican Party. And this is a clip of him talking to Margaret Brennan on CBS News' Face the Nation about these upcoming primaries, including the Ohio Senate primary tomorrow will be a big test to see like how much influence does Trump have. And here's Adam Kinzinger discussing that with Margaret Brennan in this clip.
I know you're not a fan of the former president, but he is in some ways playing a very large role in some upcoming primaries. In Ohio in particular, J.D. Vance, he's endorsed, a number of other candidates, Pennsylvania, Herschel Walker, Georgia. If those hand-picked candidates end up winning, is this a sign that indeed Donald Trump is still the leader and kingmaker within the party?
Yeah, I think it would be a sign. And I think, that's going to be this primary season is going to be a big moment to figure that out. So I have this organization, Country First, country1st.com, and our focus is on playing in some of those primaries to bring at least reasonable people to the forefront and encouraging folks that are going to live, for instance, in a guaranteed Republican district, vote in that primary. It matters. And so, yeah, I do think the primary season's going to tell. But keep in mind the former president's tactic here. If somebody starts falling behind in the polls, he always finds a reason to unendorse them because he doesn't like having a losing track record.
Well,
so
J.D. Vance, that's what, May 3rd. When you say reasonable people, you don't think reasonable people are voting in the Ohio Republican primary for him?
Well, look, from what I've seen, there's one at least maybe reasonable candidate. But no, I mean, look, if you're J.D. Vance 2 years ago, you're a totally different J.D. Vance than you are today. This is a guy that said that he frankly doesn't care what happens in Ukraine. It's very similar to what people like Tucker Carlson have said. Look, I mean, that can't, for me as a Republican, that doesn't represent what I believe. And the party has to make the decision if they want to be that kind of party or not.
So yeah, that is definitely true. And that's what we're going to see. The party is starting with... although I thought that Trump, that he endorsed J.D. Mandel. I swear I saw a clip of him over the weekend endorsing J.D. Mandel, not J.D. Van. No, that was like the first. That was this huge gaffe that if Biden made it, the Republicans would be saying he's like demented and senile. But Trump said after he decided to endorse J.D. Vance, the guy, there was like a couple weeks, I actually had the book Hillbilly Elegy behind me back here. I read that book, and it was an interesting book, but J.D. Vance is back when he wrote Hillbilly Elegy, he was a never Trumper, and he thought that Trump was terrible. But then the last couple of years, he's like seen where the majority of the Republican Party is, and he's saying all these nice things about Trump, and Trump actually endorsed him. But then over the weekend, there's this Josh Mandel who is also running and saying he's like even more pro-Trump than the guy Trump endorsed. And when Trump was speaking at a rally over the weekend, he said that he endorsed J.D. Mandel. That's huge gaffe, but at least he remembered, man, woman, person, camera, TV. He actually was bragging about that again. He was bragging about not being stupid because he passed he thought it was like an intelligence test or anyway. That was another reminder of the danger that our democracy is still in, and he's still out there, and 2024 could still happen, and especially because of, like I said, the insurrection might have been just a dry run, and now a lot of Republicans, I talked about Kevin McCarthy last week. Well, this next clip, the final newsmaker clip, is Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, who's considering running for president in 2024, who believes in the seriousness of the insurrection and actually doesn't believe that Republicans should be punishing corporations for the views they express. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that final newsmaker clip together over here.
I want to turn to some issues in your party right now. Leaked audio shows Republican House Leader Kevin McCarthy saying then President Trump bore responsibility for January 6th and that he should resign. In public, as you know, he's lied about that and about what he has fully embraced, which is now Donald Trump. You served 2 terms in Congress. Would you feel comfortable with Kevin McCarthy as Speaker of the House if Republicans take control in November?
Well, of course, Speaker McCarthy, Majority Leader McCarthy has his own set of challenges within the caucus. And he's got to be able to somehow bring that together if he's going to get elected to Speaker if we win the majority.
If you were still there, would you vote for him? For Speaker?
I'm not going to comment on that because it all depends upon who the alternative is. But I would say that we had one message after January 6th among many of our leaders recognizing the problem with the insurrection, and that tone has changed, and I believe that that's an error. I don't think we can diminish what happened on January 6th. We're going to be having hearings there in Congress. That's going to be coming out, a bunch of this public in June, and that's not going to be helpful for those that diminished the significance of that event. And so that worries me in terms of not just the majority leader, but also worries me in terms of other leaders that have diminished what happened on January 6th.
Your fellow Republican Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida signed a law effectively punishing Disney for its criticism of legislation restricting how sexual orientation and gender identity are taught in schools. Do you support DeSantis's move against Disney?
Well, first of all, Disney has handled this very poorly. Secondly, the law that was passed is, to me, common sense that in those grades, those lower grades, you shouldn't be teaching sexual orientation and those matters that should not be covered at that age. But I don't believe that government should be punitive against private businesses because we disagree with them. That's not the right approach either. And so to me, that's the old Republican principle of having a restrained government. And so let's do the right thing. It's a fair debate about these special tax privileges. I understand that debate. but let's not go after businesses and punish them because we disagree with what they said.
So DeSantis overstepped.
Well, I disagree with it. I disagree with a punitive approach to businesses.
Understood.
Businesses make mistakes they shouldn't have done there, but we should not be punishing them for their private actions.
Before I let you go, you previously told me you were keeping
his options open to run for president. He was recently in New Hampshire, and Asa Hutchinson, in answer to the next question, says he is thinking about running for president, and we all know Ron DeSantis is. Wouldn't it be interesting to see them debate that? And Asa Hutchinson, most of what he said there, I mean, I hope that's the position of the Republican Party on the insurrection, on the Don't Say Gay bill. And the one thing I disagree with, he talks about, well, we shouldn't be talking about gender identity in the K through third grade or whatever. I can't even remember the exact age group that the Don't Say Gay bill said you couldn't talk about gender identity and sexual orientation. Well, people talk about their gender identity all the time, and those in a passing way in terms of, you know, the stories that people tell. But the most important point I want to make, you know, I many years ago, I went to, when I wanted to learn more about this issue, I went to this gender spectrum conference, and I went to a whole bunch of seminars and learned about the science on this, and the people who experience gender dysphoria, who realize that they identify as a different gender than their biological sex, the sex they were born with, the time that people usually figure that out is right around the time they start going to school, you know, preschool, kindergarten, first grade, right? Because what happens is that's when a lot of things get, you know, split up into boys and girls, and that's when people realize that they don't feel like they fit in the group that they're supposed to be in. And so, I mean, to that extent, it's important for people to hear messages that affirm what they're feeling if there are people who feel that way when they first get to school. And so I disagree with Asa Hutchinson about, I mean, because that's not talking about sex, that's not grooming, that's just like helping people deal with how they may not fit in. You know, kids don't fit in for a lot of different reasons when they get to school, and there should be ways to support kids who are different, even if they're not like most other kids. And anyway, that's the last point I want to make. And before I finish the program, I did promise a bonus Dash clip. I've been a little worried about Dash, my cat, recently. He's been throwing up again. He's still eating, though. You know, you may remember, like, back around last Thanksgiving, we thought he was going to die. He didn't eat for 2 weeks. We gave him, like, antibiotics and steroids. We were waiting because he didn't eat for 2 weeks. We were pretty sure. And he's 17 years old. He'll be 17 next month. And the vet told me it was his end of lifetimes, and he's bounced back. He's, you know, eats. He's very energetic now. You've seen the Dash clips since poor Sandy died. And here, I have been worried because he's been throwing up more lately, still eating. But this is this weird home remedy that dogs and cats have. I caught my cat Dash outside indulging in this. I don't know why animals do this, but when they have an upset stomach, you can always find them doing this. I don't know, why do they eat the plants when their stomach's upset? But anyway, Dash is fine. He's around, other than the increase in the vomiting. I know, like, nothing emergent to worry about. But anyway, that's the end of the program. I do have a meeting coming up in 3 minutes. I finished my Sacramento District Attorney forums that I was helping organize, but we have a debrief for the forum we put on Saturday. If you go to my YouTube channel, youtube.com/LiberalViewer, and click on the community tab, I've actually posted that District Attorney Forum we hosted on Saturday. If you want to see the kind of work I do with the ACLU, I did other work this week. I was really busy with the ACLU this week, so maybe I'll have some time in the next few weeks to upload some other kind of video. I'm thinking about doing something maybe about the structural racism in the criminal justice system or the stupidity of the tough on crime talking points. But anyway, I have 2 minutes left, so I will thank my live viewers for showing up. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing. There are ways to support me financially through Patreon and through PayPal at links right below the video. Thank you for my Super Chat contributors, for everyone who makes me feel happy for showing up and having people to talk to about the new shows I like to watch every Sunday. And until next week, or until I have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.